Hi there, class. I thought I'd do a little video showing you how to migrate from 2D AutoCAD to 3D SketchUp. And the first thing you'll probably want to do is, some of you were experiencing some troubles with dimensioning and other things. If you are having any trouble with that, you might want to copy and paste your entire project, so selecting everything, and paste it into that template that we were using last semester. I'm just going to do Control-C or Command-C if you're on an Apple. And I'm going to make a new file. And if you remember, there's an Endicott template that I was using, and the dimensions tend to work a little better in that. And I'll just Control-V or Command-V, paste in my project. And this kind of assures that things look fairly consistent. This project was something I stole from an old student a long time ago. So I don't know exactly how well it's going to work. Anyway, this one, the units are in English standard units, so it's easier to work with. Anyway, the next thing you'll want to do is save your document as a new name. I'm just going to choose Save As Drawing. And I'm gonna put it on the desktop, and I'll call it maybe Studio Plan Test or something like that. And that way, I don't accidentally mess up my Studio Original, because I'm going to be fiddling around with some layers and other objects. Anyway, then the other thing is that you, as I demonstrated in class, you're going to want to convert the walls to 3D. If you remember, there is this view cube, which allows you to spin your model, or I can also hold down Shift and click and drag my scroll wheel. This is called orbiting, by the way, and I can orbit my model so I can see it in 3D, but as you can tell, there's nothing in 3D just yet. But I only really want to make the walls 3D. So the easiest way to do that is go to your Layer Properties menu, and again, if you're on a Mac, it's going to look slightly different. But for PC, the layer dialog menu is up there. The button is right on the top. So anyway, I'm just going to select all the layers and turn them off. It will give me a warning that, hey, you're turning the current layer off, but I don't want to do that. I'm going to keep the current layer on. And like magic, I only have walls. Now, of course, this does assume that you were a very good doobie and followed the rules and put all your walls on the walls layer. If you haven't, now would be the time to do that. Anyway, I can just select all the walls, and like I did in class, give them a thickness. If I remember correctly, you all said 9 feet was the height of the ceiling. So I'll type in 9 feet. Now, of course, this project, maybe I'll give myself another foot of ceiling because it's a big project. Okay? When you hit Enter, like magic, you have a 3D model. Okay? And within AutoCAD, if you're not sure what you've got, you can rotate the model around. You can also change the view properties just by clicking on where it says 2D wireframe. And you could choose something like hidden line. And what that will do, it helps you to visualize a little better what's solid and what is cut through. Anyway, and I can just turn back on all my layers because I do want to bring those into SketchUp for reference. Okay. And what you'll see is all the things on the floor plan are in fact there as before. Now, SketchUp doesn't recognize text and it won't recognize hatch patterns. But other than that, it will recognize any lines and generally most components, although not always. So anyway, I'm going to save my model, and I'll just hit, in this case, I think I will name it something new, just so I don't get too confused. I may want to go back to that original plan, just in case. I'll call this one Studio Test with 3D Walls. Okay? And hit Save. So now I have a copy of my model. Just in case. It's always a good idea to save what are called iterations. All right, now we go to SketchUp, and as mentioned in class, you go to File, Import, and I think you will find that most of your software that we're going to be using for your undergraduate career here has import and export options, and you are often doing this. You're bringing in things from one type of software in order to fix it up in another type of software. Anyway, choose Import. And here's my 3D model. And you can even see in the itty bitty tiny little preview that it is in 3D. Click open. And AutoCAD will give you a warning message. As I mentioned, hatches do not get imported, nor does text for that matter. And there's my model. And you can see, based on this scale figure, that the model is about the right height. And here it is. Okay. Now, as you look at your model, you might think, hey, are there any other things that I can change or make 3D before I bring it in here into SketchUp? So for example, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, oh, these curving walls, I think those are half walls. And maybe I can stretch out these tables. Maybe I can give them some thickness too. That'll make my life a little easier when I go to set up my perspective. So let me go back to AutoCAD. And I'll go to my one drawing with the 3D walls in it. And maybe I'll try selecting some of these walls. And I'll select these guys too. And in the properties, again, I will give their thickness. If it's a half wall, it's probably about 3 feet. Okay, so you see how you can preview them in AutoCAD. And if it is an object which is easy to extrude in AutoCAD, you might as well do it. So for example, these coffee tables, I'll make those 24 inches. As you may remember, in AutoCAD you don't have to type in the inches, it just shows up automatically. Now I could try to extrude some of these other things like these chairs. However, what you'll find is that the chairs are complex objects and they are a little more complicated. So it's up to you if you want to spend the effort in AutoCAD editing the block and making it 3D inside the block. That, by all means, is a good way to do it. However, I think I'm just going to go into SketchUp because AutoCAD gives me conniptions. So I'm going to just save my AutoCAD file. I'll go back to SketchUp here, and maybe I'll just make a new file. I'm not going to save changes. And I'll do the import all over again. And of course I get the same error message. And there we go. Now my model looks a lot better. Okay, so once you have your model in SketchUp, first thing to do is save. You always want to make sure you remember to save. I always forget to save, and then my computer crashes or something like that, and you have nothing to go back on. So Studio Model for Perspectives maybe is what I'll call this. And there we go. I have my model saved. Now what you will see is that in the SketchUp model, first of all, to orbit your model, you just click and drag the scroll wheel. If you hold down Shift and click and drag the scroll wheel, it does pan. So it's actually the opposite of AutoCAD in that way. Holding down Shift and clicking and dragging your scroll wheel gives you pan, whereas if you just click and drag your scroll wheel, it gives you the orbit button. Other than that, scrolling in or out zooms you in or out. Of course, if you're running a Mac, the scroll wheel works in the opposite way of a PC. So that's how we modify our drawing. Now, I can just kind of zoom in and try to place myself inside the plan so that I can get my perspective view. But SketchUp knows that you use its software to produce perspective drawings, so it provides you the ability to place your station point. And the way it does that, SketchUp uses the terminology of a camera, sort of. So you can go to the camera pull-down menu and choose Position Camera. And what it does, see how there's a little guy attached, or maybe a little androgynous person connected to my camera, my cursor. If I just click inside the plan, suddenly I am zoomed in on the plan. I'm looking out the windows. Now, if you look at my cursor, it's an eyeball. That's what's called the Look Around tool. If I click and drag my left button, it allows me to look around the model depending on which way I drag my button. So this is really handy. You can look down, you can look up, or you can look straight ahead. Now we know, because we're all smart about perspective, that when I look directly at that back wall, I am looking in one-point perspective, right? If I'm looking at a corner, it's in two-point perspective. So here I am looking at the back wall. I can also pan up and down. However, what you will find if you look on the lower right, it tells you your eye height. So unless you have some really good reason, like here's maybe a seated view, and here's maybe a really tall basketball player view, probably it's best to stick with an eye height that's a natural height. By the way, you can type in a number. So if I'm a little on the short side, I can type in 5'4", and SketchUp will move the camera for you. Now, other things that you can do to turn this into to zoom in and out, you can use the scroll wheel. You can also use this zoom tool. Looks like a magnifying glass. And this allows you to, a little more precisely, depending on how fast you move your mouse, just by moving up and down or left and right, you can kind of slowly zoom in and out. The other thing is that you can change what's called the field of view. Now, this is the same field of view that we saw when we drew hand drawings, except this time it's a number that we can type in rather than drawing lines which are parallel to the floor plan and all that. Interiors do tend to be quite distorted, so I'm going to type in 60. I don't even have to click in that value control box down at the bottom. I can just type in a number and hit enter, and what you will see is that nothing changes. Here, let me try that again. 60 degrees. There we go. Now we've got a much wider field of view. You see how I can see even around these columns, and I can see many more of the windows. Now, if you want to do some further looking around, you can go back to this camera menu, and here's the look around button. And if you decide you don't like where the camera is, you can always zoom out and reposition it. Somehow I've gotten myself a little bit higher. Let's go back down to 5 feet, or 5'4" maybe. All right. Now, the other thing that you want to do, you want to make sure that this is a 1-point perspective. The way you do that, SketchUp works in 3-point by default. And in fact, if you look at the edges of these walls, if you compare them to the edge of your screen, they're actually at an angle. They're not straight up and down, and that would be a 3-point perspective. We want to force SketchUp to go into a 2-point perspective. What that does is it makes all the vertical lines parallel. You see how when I did that, all the lines snapped into place. If you go back and choose the look around tool, what you will see is that suddenly you are no longer in 2-point perspective. If you look on the upper right, it will tell you when you are in 2-point perspective. So I'll just go back if I do any repositioning to make sure that it looks correct. Okay. Now, the last thing that you'll want to do is we want to come back to this view in case we want to make further changes to our model. We want to be able to access it. It's very easy to save views in SketchUp. There is a view pull-down menu. If you go to the animation grouping down at the bottom, there is an option called Add Scene. And what this will do, this will create a little tab at the top of your drawing, which is basically a way to quickly access this particular view. And there it is. Now, I've got my scene. I could come and I could zoom out, and I'm just going to scroll out, maybe orbit around, say, oh yeah, this is a great project. If I click the scene button up here in the upper left, like magic, it puts me back right where I was. So anyway, the last thing you'll want to do, save your model. And there you go. You've got yourself an instant perspective project.